Healthcare news recap. I picked out a couple of news stories that I talk about that I thought, again, I could add some insight into. I'm not just going to read the news to you guys. I think that'd be quite boring, and there's plenty of other places to do that. I'm not a journalist, but unlike a journalist, I do have some domain experience and some insight that you probably wouldn't or couldn't get from some fake news or something like that. So anyway, I saw this article that physician assistant pay is over $100,000, which I think is fascinating. Where I come from, that's a lot of money. My parents struggle to make that kind of money, and I think what's amazing is the labor markets for healthcare are not well understood. I was at Columbia University last Friday talking to students about drug prices and so forth, and there's a lot of passion about the subject. I'm glad I was so well received, but there are people who are critical of what we spend on healthcare. And what's amazing is when you tell people that 90% of healthcare actually comes from the people in the healthcare industry, not the products. And 90% of healthcare costs are coming from actual people and institutions and not products like drugs or medical devices and things like that. And I think that's a really, hey Frank, that's a really fascinating sort of thing to learn. Because you sort of think, oh, it must be drugs like my drugs or like Pfizer's drugs, and the reality is those are actually probably the most cost-efficient products in the system. So labor markets are in many ways controlled. Don't forget that you can't just become a doctor because you feel like it. There are sort of these academic industrial complexes that form between physicians and their lobby, and you can actually control physician pay not directly but indirectly through those mechanisms. And doctors, I will tell you, do not like losing money. Doctors very much enjoy being rich. And in fact, they'd like to be richer. And so that dynamic is really hard to describe and understand. And when you see here that physician assistant pay is now a six-figure job, that is something that is somewhat shocking. And the average physician is making over $300,000 a year. One stops wondering, is it really greed from the drug companies? Is it greed from anyone? Or is it just interesting labor markets? And does our government need to do things to crack those labor markets and increase supply into those labor markets? And to a certain extent, supply is natural in those labor markets. You see more and more people interested in becoming PAs or nurses or whatever because it's great money. And those labor markets can get saturated, but oftentimes what I find is that there's a yearning when you see something like this where you can make twice as much money as normal, as normal GDP per capita at least, in a field that doesn't require extra training or extra study. In fact, it may even require less. What's often behind that dynamic is not a decision of one producer or one player or even a whole industry. It's really a generational, multi-decade phenomenon that is happening. And the same thing is happening with computer programmers. We hired for my software company, we looked at 200, maybe 400 different resumes and hired two people that we thought were really qualified, and both of them have a starting salary close to $200,000 a year. It's really more about, it's way more than any one pricing decision or any one law that somebody can pass. We as a society want to spend more money on healthcare. We want to spend more money ensuring that all the science and technology we're building is going to a longer, happier life. And the same thing with technology. We want to consume more technology. And that's why the labor markets, there is a greater demand than there is a supply. And that's sort of where price, if you've taken Econ 101, you know what happens to price. So anyway, moving on from that, I noticed that Johnson & Johnson had these really weird reports, and I wonder for two drugs, Xarelto and Invokana. If you don't know, Xarelto is a blood thinner that's superior to warfarin, and Invokana is a diabetes drug for type 2 diabetes. And both drugs are supposed to be growth assets for J&J, but both had these big down year-over-year, surprising down year-over-year numbers. And Q1 is often a bad quarter for healthcare, for drugs, but this surprised even me. And it'll be interesting to see if we see the same stuff with Merck or Pfizer or so forth. The other thing I noticed with J&J is Darzalex is now annualizing over $1 billion. It just launched recently for multiple myeloma. I've had a lot of friends die of multiple myeloma. I'm so happy to see the drug win FDA approval, and also for a fourth-line medicine, right? This is a drug that you're supposed to use after you failed 3 other myeloma drugs. It's already a billion-dollar medicine, which tells you how much we're valuing sort of drugs that can move the needle in really tough diseases. So baricitinib got FDA rejection, and this was really strange. Obviously, no one's privy to the rejection letter, but how these companies, Incyte and Eli Lilly, got this rejection are a little bit surprising. I think what the FDA is saying, and this is a lot of drug companies' fear, is that drugs that don't move the needle on efficacy and have questionable safety relative to drugs in their class shouldn't be approved. Baricitinib was filed for rheumatoid arthritis. There are a dozen drugs for rheumatoid arthritis. So the idea that baricitinib couldn't move the needle as well on efficacy and its safety was maybe specious. Meanwhile, there is another JAK inhibitor approved for rheumatoid arthritis from Pfizer. It's sort of it's called tofacitinib. It's sort of a weird question as to why baricitinib was rejected. Again, it could be some side effect we don't know about, but it is really an interesting dynamic to see baricitinib rejected. It was FDA approved in Europe, so it could be like one of these drugs like Galvus, which was rejected by the FDA but approved by Europe, where the FDA is just taking a little bit more conservative of a stance. But anyway, we'll sort of see there. So Dupixent got FDA approval for eczema. This was from Sanofi and Regeneron, and they launched at an interesting price, and remarkably, reporters said that it was a sober price and it reflected more discussion about price increases, which was surprising to me because it's $37,000. So for an eczema drug, that's a lot. I don't sort of see that as a cheap launch. And in fact, I think the Regeneron CEO kind of took a subliminal shot at me, saying that this was pricing for quote unquote adults in the room. Well, I'm certainly an adult, and $37,000 isn't a lot. It's quite a lot for a drug you have to take every day and every year for eczema. So in any event, Zejula was FDA approved for Tesaro. This is a new choice for ovarian cancer, and it was priced at around $150,000 or $160,000, something like that. So quite an expensive drug for ovarian cancer. They're one of the first new drugs for ovarian cancer. So we'll see how, again, Tesaro stock fell as investors now start to worry about how much are they actually going to sell of this stuff, and the stock had run up quite a lot, but I think Tesaro will be just fine. So in any event, tech stocks I thought are having an interesting month. So interestingly, Verizon and AT&T are pretty much some of the only tech stocks that haven't done really well this year. The Nasdaq is up 10%, whereas the S&P 500 is only up 5%, which the tech-heavy Nasdaq is already up 10%. So if you just invested in tech stocks, you'd be up 10% this year. You could probably just sell now and take the rest of the year off. 10% is a lot for a year.